All right, welcome everyone. It seems like most of us have been able to get connected, so we're going to go ahead and jump in. Thanks everyone for being here today. My name is Angela Farwig, and I'm a consultant with School Readiness Consulting. I am joined today by my colleagues Samantha Gray-Keene and Maya Manning. And on behalf of all of us, I want to thank the Office of Great Start for their support in this work. Before we get started, I do want to highlight a few housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded. Therefore, you will note everyone is automatically muted and videos are turned off. We've also turned on closed captioning. Please feel free to turn it on for yourself by clicking the live transcript button at the bottom of your screen and selecting show subtitles. If you have questions on the content of the webinar, we will be pausing at a few points during the presentation, and we'll also have some time at the end. So please feel free to use the chat to note questions, and we will try to address those during the breaks or at the end. You can also use the raise your hand feature to ask a question during the breaks. And if you have any questions on technology or how things are working, please note that in the chat and we will provide support. So because we are recording, we are going to go ahead and turn off the video for the SRC folks, and then we will dive into the webinar. Okay, great. Let's go ahead and get started going over what is going to be happening with this webinar series. The webinar is the first in a series of webinars that will be taking place over the next several weeks. The webinars are all on Thursdays at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. If you can't make those times coming up, don't worry. All the sessions will be recorded and posted. The webinar series is geared toward any interested Michigan community member who would like to learn more about coordinated eligibility and enrollment. Individuals may attend any combination of sessions. It's not required to attend the webinar series to apply for the upcoming community of practice, but the webinars may help with the application process. And turning to our agenda for the day. We want to take a quick moment to orient everyone to what we will be covering during today's webinar on what is coordinated eligibility and enrollment. We'll spend some time initially setting the context for this webinar and coordinated eligibility and enrollment overall in Michigan. We will then introduce a coordinated eligibility and enrollment framework and highlight key themes from the coordinated eligibility and enrollment landscape that was recently developed for the state. We'll wrap up by previewing what's coming next in terms of coordinated eligibility and enrollment resources and opportunities and answer any final questions. So moving into the first part of our agenda, which is setting the context, we wanted to take a few minutes to discuss the opportunity in Michigan. While coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts have been underway in states and communities across the country, including in Michigan, they've become a national priority more recently through the federal preschool development grants Birth to 5 initiative. Michigan's current coordinated eligibility and enrollment approach is born out of the important work carried out through the state's original PDG B5 grant, including the needs assessment of Michigan's prenatal to 5 mixed delivery system, the PDG B5 strategic plan, and the Listen and Learn Symposium, all of which led to the state's successful application for a PDG B5 renewal grant. The PDG B5 renewal grant included a bonus opportunity for states to pilot or expand efforts for, quote, coordinated application/enrollment or centralized eligibility, waitlist, and enrollment systems development to streamline enrollment for families and programs that support child health and development, early learning, and family economic stability. And we'll be diving into what exactly that all means in this webinar. To follow through on this opportunity, the Michigan Office of Great Start has partnered with School Readiness Consulting to implement this project focused on supporting local communities and building and enhancing systems to coordinate eligibility and enrollment, which we will sometimes refer to as CEE. Taking a community-based approach will build on important work undertaken by communities in Michigan and accomplish many of the goals set by the state as part of its PDG efforts, including more effectively include family voice and choice, deliver child and family services that are highly contextualized, and strengthen partnerships and coordination locally across programs and services. The project is supported by Preschool Development Grant Birth to 5 resources awarded to Michigan in 2019 and renewed for 2020 and through 2022, and consists of a series of overlapping activities to support CEE efforts across the state. So the first step of this project was the development of a coordinated eligibility and enrollment landscape, which is posted on OGS's EDG website. The information in the landscape is intended to be used to guide Michigan state-level efforts to support the development and expansion of community-based CEE systems and individual communities' efforts to create these systems. We will be introducing a high-level summary of the information that's found in the landscape during this webinar today, and then also taking a closer look during next week's webinar. The second part of the project is this 4-part webinar series. The third part of the project is a CEE toolkit to help communities across the state build or enhance their CEE systems. The fourth part of the project is a community of practice in which SRC will provide consultation and learning opportunities to Michigan communities engaging in coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts. And we will provide some additional detail on the webinar series, the toolkit, and the COP towards the end of the webinar. So diving into what is coordinated eligibility and enrollment? What are we talking about when we use that word? It's a term that can mean a lot of different things. Generally, coordinated eligibility and enrollment can be understood as a systems building approach that aims to address the current fragmented nature of the early childhood system to ensure that all young children and their families can benefit from the full range of services and supports that are available to them. There are a variety of approaches and strategies that can be used in coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. On this slide, you can see 2 common approaches and some of the terminology that's used. So you'll see one-stop shop. This involves providing a central or single point of entry through which families can access a variety of programs. Some other terms used to describe this type of approach or other approaches include single point of entry, centralized access, or referral hub. You'll also see the term no wrongdoing. This involves developing processes and systems that link families to the right resources to meet their needs, regardless of which program or service provider a family connects with first. We also created some visuals that represent these 2 different approaches and how they function. The one-stop shop visual shows a family using a central location or resources to learn about options and be connected to available services. The no wrong door visual shows families being connected to other available resources through a variety of entry points. States and communities often use one or both of these approaches when designing CEE systems, specifically when focusing on how families initially access services. It's important to note that this is just one of several important components of comprehensive CEE systems, as we will describe in just a bit. So turning to the goals of coordinated eligibility and enrollment. Comprehensive CEE systems advance several important goals. First, better meet the needs of children and families. CEE systems center the experiences of families in learning about, choosing, and accessing early learning programs and services. CEE systems should be built around families and reflect their needs and preferences, rather than having complicated and fragmented policies and programs driving the experiences of families. Second goal is helping ensure equitable access to programs and services. CEE systems prioritize serving families that have historically had the least access to services and supports and include a strong focus on cultural and linguistic responsiveness and supporting families with identifying and enrolling in programs. Coordinated eligibility and enrollment can also provide a method for analyzing which families are able to access appropriate services and which are not, and the way through which those gaps can be addressed. Allocate limited resources more efficiently. CEE systems focus on reducing duplication in enrollment, moving families off of waitlists into programs with availability, and streamlining administrative processes for families and providers to ensure that the maximum number of families can benefit from limited resources and that those resources are being utilized fully and equitably. And finally, promote effective service delivery. Successful CEE approaches require strong collaboration, which is sometimes difficult to foster in a system with limited resources. Engaging community stakeholders in CEE efforts can help break down silos and competition between providers, generating more effective approaches to service delivery that can create improved outcomes for families. So what does this look like in Michigan? Michigan's vision for advancing coordinated eligibility and enrollment is that families can access all programs and supports available to them at any point where they come into contact with the early childhood system. Thus, this vision includes developing and supporting existing CEE efforts to incorporate a no wrong door approach. The state has a strong place from which to build its vision with a robust early care and education system that includes early on and early childhood special education, home visiting, Head Start and Early Head Start, childcare, and the Great Start Readiness Program. This mixed delivery system is part of a broader network of programs and supports that aim to meet families' comprehensive needs in the early years, such as health, food, and income supports. The overall goal is to build on what is already in place, make connections, and leverage various parts of the network of supports to develop equitable, family-centered CEE systems that serve families wherever they are. And so we want to take a moment right now to pause following that introduction and see if there are any questions. Okay, I don't think there's any questions at this point, so we will just dive into the next section. We're going to now spend the bulk of our presentation talking about the framework and themes. The landscape contains a summary of current efforts that support coordinated eligibility and enrollment that are underway in Michigan, and best practices and successful examples from states and local communities. It's not a short document, as you can imagine, as it was intended to be comprehensive and capture the work holistically, rather than focus on one specific approach or method. Today, we're going to give a high-level overview of the landscape as a way of introducing communities to the overall framework and key themes that can be found in coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts. We would definitely encourage you to take a glance at the landscape. You may want to dive into it one section at a time, or read through the executive summary, as there's a lot of additional detail that can be found in those documents. And as a reminder, those are both available on the OGS PDG website. We will also be diving into more details from the landscape at next week's webinar, which is going to focus more on specific examples and strategies being used in coordinated eligibility. So introducing the CEE framework. This graphic shows the coordinated eligibility and enrollment framework that has been developed to support the state and local communities in implementing coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. The framework represents the key components that are central to creating family-centered, equitable CEE systems. You'll see the framework has three components. First, principles of coordinated eligibility and enrollment, and those are found in the outer dotted circle. Those are family-centered, relationship-based, equitable, and coordinated and aligned. Next, there are areas where state policy can best support local CEE efforts, and those are found in the middle light blue circle. Those include shared vision, resources, data, and building local capacity. Then you'll see key elements that constitute successful on-the-ground CEE systems. Those are found in the middle graphic that sort of looks like a flower. These are awareness of resources, selection of resources, receipt of resources, and connections between resources. And you'll know all of these components are placed around families, who are at the center and focus of all CEE efforts. The framework presents a way for communities to approach coordinated eligibility and enrollment work comprehensively and engage families throughout the early years and across systems while promoting the equitable and effective allocation of resources. So now we're going to dive into each of these components in a little more depth, starting with the principles. While coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems should be tailored to the unique community and context in which they're taking place, there are 4 principles that can guide the work of designing and implementing CEE systems no matter the context. These are core values that apply to all elements of coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems at all stages of development and implementation, and should be considered throughout the process and incorporated into success metrics. So first, family-centered. All efforts must consider the needs, preferences, and experiences of children and families first and foremost. Through purposeful ongoing collaboration with families, communities can ensure that their CEE efforts are driven by what families want and need and respond to community values. Relationship-based. Relationships are really the cornerstone of successful CEE efforts. They are key to sharing information, breaking down barriers to access, and ensuring that all stakeholders are valued and supported. Communities should build on and prioritize developing trust and connections between families, providers, and other stakeholders in developing coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. Equitable. Equity in early childhood means all children have a fair and just opportunity to reach their full potential and succeed, so that race, language, and other social factors no longer predict developmental and educational success. Advancing equity necessitates acknowledging racism, sexism, and economic injustice as the root causes of inequities and as existing barriers that require an intentional, system-wide effort to remove. CEE systems should provide services and allocate resources according to the needs, preferences, and experiences of each child and family, focusing on those that have historically lacked access to services and building on the strengths and assets often overlooked in children, families, and communities. And finally, coordinated and aligned. For coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems to achieve their goals, stakeholders cannot work in silos. Opportunities to collaborate and coordinate must be identified and implemented at all levels of the early childhood system to streamline and improve services for families and create efficiency. This includes prioritizing the resources and supports needed for cross-agency coordination at the local and state level, including leadership, technical assistance, and staffing. Taken together, these 4 principles can serve as important checkpoints throughout efforts to develop coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. Stopping and asking how these principles are embedded or advanced in community CEE efforts can help ensure that your system does in fact create more equitable outcomes for families. So now turning to the elements of CEE. There are 4 key elements that are integral to developing and implementing successful and comprehensive coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. They are categorized here in the framework using more general language so as to get to the heart of the work and the impact that comprehensive CEE systems can have on families, rather than relying on terminology that may not always resonate with families or those not as familiar with early childhood systems. So first is awareness of resources. This includes things like outreach and communication. Selection of resources. This includes eligibility determination and verification processes. Receipt of resources. This includes applying for and enrolling in programs and supports. And finally, connections between resources. This includes connections, referrals, and transitions into and between programs and supports. These elements can be used by communities that are just starting in this work and those that already have efforts underway. Some communities may be stronger in one element or the other. Some may be working across all 4 of these. It can look different everywhere. Developing a coordinated eligibility and enrollment system that encompasses all 4 of these elements can help ensure that the system meets its goals and that all families can access the resources and supports available to them and help their children meet their fullest potential. Now moving into the elements, we're going to start with building family awareness of resources. We are now going to run through the 4 CEE elements and provide a few key themes that emerge from the landscape scan regarding each one. Just want to remind everyone that this is intended to be an overview, as we will be diving into these in more depth during next week's webinar, and that you can find more information in the CEE landscape report and executive summary. So looking at building awareness, a foundational component of coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems is increasing families' awareness of resources and services. This is important because existing outreach and communication systems often do not reach or meaningfully connect with families to make them aware of the full spectrum of available supports. Strategies to maximize family awareness underway in Michigan and around the country often fall into 2 general categories. First, developing online resources such as comprehensive websites that are available to all families. Recent efforts in Michigan have focused on ensuring accessibility of these sites, including translation, and addressing barriers families face in accessing a computer or the internet. Second category is fostering community-driven communication and outreach in individual communities to ensure that messages and materials reflect families' unique culture, context, and experience. Here, a key finding is that community collaboration and trusted messengers play a vital role in successful community-based outreach to families. Next, we're going to turn to helping families select available resources and services. Helping families select resources is important because there are a variety of child and family serving programs that are available, many of which have complicated eligibility processes. To address this, successful coordination, eligibility, and enrollment systems seek to strengthen family and provider capacity to navigate these complexities, while also simplifying eligibility processes wherever possible. Examples of efforts focused on eligibility processes include expanding data sharing capabilities so that eligibility is verified more easily between systems, increasing coordination through systems building, and implementing regulatory changes to help streamline eligibility and verification for families, for example, in the childcare system. States and communities have also developed online tools, such as online self-service portals for families and providers to use to explore benefits and services. They've also invested in dedicated staff to help families navigate eligibility determination and verification processes. Next element is ensuring families receive resources and services. Ultimately, the goal of coordinated eligibility and enrollment is to ensure that young children and their families receive resources and supports that help them learn, grow, and thrive. Yet because of the different funding streams, eligibility requirements, and limited available spots, applying for and enrolling in these various programs can be complicated and burdensome for both families and providers. Successful coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems seek to mitigate these barriers through two approaches. First, improving application processes to better meet the needs of families. Examples of this include developing common applications, providing multiple methods to submit applications, and matching families to the programs of their choice. Second, states and communities have worked to improve enrollment tracking and waitlist management. Michigan and other states have developed a unique child identifier to help track enrollment. There are also state-level efforts underway to expand data systems to track enrollment in a wider range of child and family serving programs, develop unified waiting lists, and increase capacity to access real-time data about slots and vacancies. Several communities in Michigan have developed their own processes to track enrollment and manage waitlists for various early childhood programs that are available in the community. And finally, keeping families connected and supported. We know that young children and their families have the most opportunity when all of their needs are met and they are consistently supported throughout the early years. Coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts have begun to focus on making successful referrals to comprehensive services and facilitating successful transitions for families between programs through two approaches. First, increasing family and provider knowledge of comprehensive resources. With this category, states and communities are taking some different approaches. Some are developing online resources that provide information and connections to comprehensive supports. Others are implementing relationship building efforts, such as locating trusted community members in community spaces to connect directly with families, or facilitating shared professional development among providers so that they know what each other can offer. When it comes to transition specifically, efforts in Michigan and in other states have often focused on two key points, from early intervention to early childhood special education, and the transition from early childhood into kindergarten. The second strategy here is fostering cross-sector collaboration. Here again, there are different and innovative approaches being used, including developing data sharing platforms across sectors, and innovative approaches that leverage relationships between providers and families, or among providers from different sectors, to foster warm handoff and tracking across systems. There are pilots underway in the home visiting sector focused on this, for example. These are all strategies that can be employed in developing no wrong door approaches that seek to ensure that families can access services no matter how or where they first come into contact with the system. And now turning briefly to the state's role in advancing coordinated eligibility and enrollment. The framework includes 4 best practices that states can implement to support successful community CEE systems. First, setting and communicating a vision for coordinated eligibility and enrollment developed in partnership with communities and families so that it resonates with communities and is communicated broadly and consistently. Second, advancing data use in ways that support strong coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems, such as using data to inform outreach to families and ensure that resources are being allocated equitably. Third, leveraging federal and state resources to support community-based coordinated eligibility and enrollment efforts. And fourth, building local capacity in key areas to strengthen community-based CEE efforts, such as developing partnerships, designing messages and communications, utilizing technology, and engaging philanthropy. As communities develop their own coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems, they should consider how their efforts can align with and benefit from these state-level efforts and resources. And now we are going to take a pause. That was a lot of information. So we are going to pause for questions. I know it was a lot to take in. We do want to remind everyone that there is, this is an overview and that more information and details will be provided on the webinar next week. And you can also find a lot more information in the landscape and other materials that will be forthcoming. So I am going to pause for just a minute or two and see if there's questions. Yeah, and feel free to use the chat or to raise your hand, and we will see what we can discuss.
Hi, this is Christy Callahan. I was just going to point out Becky has a question saying that the framework seems to align perfectly with Help Me Grow. Are we exploring how to move Michigan to a statewide Help Me Grow system? Right now, it's only in a handful of counties.
Absolutely. Yes, we did see that question. And I think at this point as SRC, you know, we would probably encourage you to follow up with OGS. We can also say that the approach is really focused on supporting communities and being very informed by what is going to work in the local community context. And so that's really our approach here. And SRC's approach is developing the landscape as a tool and a variety of resources to support communities in this work so that they have the choice to implement what's going to work best for the families, you know, in partnership with families in their communities. Okay, well, then we are going to just wrap up quickly. It's actually a good segue into the next part of our presentation. We're going to briefly just try to look ahead and again, give everyone some time at the end to ask some questions. So we wanted to make everyone aware of the variety of resources and opportunities that are coming up through this project, in addition to the webinar series that we're all on right now. So first, the coordinated eligibility and enrollment landscape that's been mentioned. It was just the first in a series of activities being undertaken by the state to support local communities in developing successful coordinated eligibility and enrollment systems. The second activity is the development of a coordinated eligibility and enrollment toolkit. The toolkit will be aligned to the landscape and will share guidance, tips, and tools to help communities develop a plan to build or enhance community-based CEE systems. It's really intended to be a hands-on guide for implementing coordinated eligibility and enrollment in local communities. The third activity is technical assistance, in which school readiness consulting will provide consultation and learning opportunities to select Michigan communities engaging in CEE efforts. This TA will consist of different types of opportunities for 8 communities, including one-on-one assistance and peer learning through a community of practice. A final report on these efforts, including lessons learned and feedback from communities on the toolkit and how the state can best support communities in this work, will be developed as part of the community of practice. And then we just want to take a minute to plug the webinar series. Looking ahead, we'll be taking a deeper dive into the coordinated eligibility and enrollment landscape, exploring examples, strategies, and best practices from Michigan and other states that have developed CEE systems and approaches. So we hope you'll join us for that next Thursday, October 21st at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. The third webinar will focus on developing a community-based coordinated eligibility and enrollment plan and the information that will be included in the forthcoming toolkit. That webinar will take place on Thursday, October 28th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. And the final webinar will focus on applying to the community of practice. That webinar will take place on Thursday, November 4th at 1 p.m. Eastern, 12 p.m. Central. So we hope you will join us. Again, just a reminder, those are all going to be recorded and will be available if you can't make it. So we will take a few moments. This was sort of a quick webinar, but was really intended to be an introduction to this. It's a lot of information, but we really do appreciate you joining us. And we'll just take a moment to see if there's any more questions.
Hi, Angela. We got one in the chat. We had a question about communities who do not participate in the community of practice using the toolkit. And absolutely, the toolkit is going to be available to all Michigan communities separately from the community of practice. That is the intention, is that those who aren't in a place to be in the community of practice at this moment can still absolutely use the toolkit to progress.
Thanks, Maya. Yeah, I have to apologize. I think the chat function is, I don't know, I'm not seeing things. Yes, that's absolutely right. The project is really focused on providing sort of tiered resources and supports to sort of meet communities wherever they are, and so that they have options in terms of what is most helpful to them in terms of implementing coordinated eligibility and enrollment. So there's resources that are sort of more universal to communities, such as the landscape and the webinar series. And the toolkit as well will be made available. And then we also will be having the community of practice that will be, a more tailored cohort of communities that will be receiving supports. And I also want to plug on the screen right now is an email address that we have set up for this project. And if you have any questions at any time, you can use that email to contact us. And it is, and jump in if I'm wrong, it's mi_CEE@schoolreadinessconsulting.com.
Hi, Angela. We got one more question in the chat that went to me about the landscape and where people can find that. Or in this case, the better question, when?
So my understanding, and I don't know if anyone can pull it up, is that the full landscape report, there's a link to it on OGS's School Development Grant website. There's a clickable link. After I say this, I can try to find it. And then there's also an executive summary. I do know there was maybe some technical difficulties in getting the executive summary uploaded. I'm not sure if those have been resolved quite yet, but it is publicly available. And if you can't access a copy, I know we could certainly send it as well.
And response, Angela, is you are correct. We were getting some chats in that people did indeed find it on the website.
Oh, good. Okay, great. Okay, well, I think we can wrap up. I will try to find that link and throw it in the chat if people want to stay on for that. But otherwise, thanks to everyone for joining us. Please do reach out with any questions on this work, and we really appreciate your time today. Oh, and it looks like there is a link now in the chat.